Hey everybody, my name is SPAZ and I'm a CD junkie. In this episode of CD Junkie, I would like to talk about one of the most overlooked LA bands of the new wave punk era. And of course, I am talking about the Busboys. Now, the Busboys, as you can tell by that photo, are an African-American band, apart from the drummer, who I believe was of Hispanic descent. And maybe in that time period, people were going, ooh, egads, it's an African-American new wave band. This can't be. So maybe they were looked at as a novelty at the time, but I can assure you that they were just as good as any of their contemporaries. And I'm talking about the Plimsolls, the Knack, 2020, The Last, the Twisters, who they mention on one of their songs, the new Cats, or the Cats, who they also mention. Any of those bands, they were just as good as those bands. They didn't play power pop, and they really didn't play new wave, but they played sort of a combination of rock and roll with a little bit of soul and blues in there, with huge dashes of new wave and a great sense of melodicism in their music as well. Lyrically, they tackled, of course, the racial and the social issues, but they didn't tackle them in a way that was distracting from the music. You know, they approached them in a humorous way, not lighthearted, but in a humorous way, such as a song called "There Goes the Neighborhood," which actually addressed white people moving into a black neighborhood. Now, I got into the Busboys because I would go to Licorice Pizza and I would flip through the albums. And as I said it in previous videos, I would stop and look at any album by a band that had "the" in front of their name. So, of course, the Busboys fall right into that. So that first album that I bought came out in 1980. I was, I think, 16 when I bought this. And it is called Minimum Wage Rock and Roll. In fact, this cover here is so iconic that it has become their logo. And it is an absolutely stellar album. Did You See Me from this album makes almost every other 80s compilation or new wavy type compilation that I make. And it's fantastic because it's all over the map musically. It's straight ahead, edgy rock and roll. Then there's some great quirky pop moments. There's songs with great hooks and great melodies. And it's absolutely a fantastic debut album. I saw them live, I believe, during this tour. And one of the most entertaining bands I've ever seen live. You know, Brian O'Neill, who's the main member of the band, who's pretty much him and the drummer Steve Felix were pretty much the only consistent members up through today. Brian, extremely talented. He's a great keyboard player and a great songwriter and vocalist as well. But each song might feature a lead part from 3 or 4 of the band members. So the Busboys were this fantastic musical unit that just really kicked it out of the ballpark on this debut album. Came out in 1980, like I said. Minimum Wage Rock and Roll is the name of it. 2 years later, it took us 2 years until American Worker came out in 1982. This was a slightly more slick album, a little bit more commercial. Sounded like maybe the label was trying to get behind them. I don't know. In fact, there's a song on here that some of you are going to be familiar with, but not by the Busboys. Mike Chapman and Nicky Chin wrote a song called Heart and Soul, and the Busboys did it on this album, and I thought it was a great song because Brian O'Neill gave it this little vocal hook, and I didn't like it as much as Brian's originals on the album, but I still thought it was a great song. Now, that song was not a hit for the Busboys, so they gave it to Huey Lewis and the News, and that was pretty much Huey Lewis's breakthrough song, Heart and Soul. But anyway, the rest of this album is fantastic. Soul Surfing in the USA, Last Forever. This album may have sounded a little bit more new wavy, but the hooks on these songs were even bigger than the hooks on the first album. And it's just great stuff from a band that just kept moving forward. This album may not have got them as much attention as the first album, but it's solid through and through. Now, the interesting thing is, the same year, they appeared in the movie 48 Hours, the Eddie Murphy, Nick Nolte movie. And they did a song called The Boys Are Back in Town. Not the Thin Lizzy song, but that became a hit for them. And of course, it wasn't on this album, but in that same movie, they did the song New Shoes, which is featured on this album. Now, The Boys Are Back in Town was on the soundtrack to 48 Hours, so that's the only way that you can get it. And I don't believe that ever came out on CD officially, so that original version may not be around on CD. At least I have not found it on CD. Now, I thought that they'd follow that up with something else, and, I waited another year and nothing came, and 1984 rolled around, and the only thing that came out was they had a song called Cleaning Up the Town on the Ghostbusters soundtrack. And, of course, I waited for a new album and waited for a new album. Something must have happened behind the scenes because there was no more new Busboys at that period. They were unable to build on the momentum, and it was sad because they were such a great band. Then all of a sudden in 1988, out comes Money Don't Make No Man. And this was released independently. They were no longer on the Arista label. And this was stylistically completely different. This was more of a, synth funk R&B soul album. And it took me by surprise. I have to admit, it took me by surprise. I did not expect that. I was expecting some more straight ahead rock and roll. But it's still, once you get past the fact that it's not the same sounding Busboys, then you start really digging the songs. Seems like it might have been influenced by Prince a little bit, but there's a lot of other different things happening on this album. And it's not just all synth R&B funk. There's some great songs on here that you really need to check out. Don't just write it off. If you've heard one song from this and said, I don't like the way that sounds, then just move past that. I don't like the way that sounds bit in your head and give it a listen, because it took me a little while to really get into the album. But, like I said, Brian O'Neill's a great songwriter, great vocalist, and, the band's a great band. So sadly, that was it for the Busboys. I have no idea, I didn't have their phone numbers, couldn't give them a call and say, Bri, what's up? What's happening? And they disappeared for many, many, many years. But they did end up on the internet, so you could sort of track them down. And they were doing live shows and doing the occasional TV appearances, and they just weren't releasing any music. But then came the year 2000, and this album called The Boys Are Back in Town. Now, since the song The Boys Are Back in Town is not officially available on CD, they went ahead and they re-recorded it. Now, they re-recorded it almost identical to the original arrangement, but it's a lot tougher. It's a lot more rock and roll as of the year 2000. They recreated the arrangement, but it's just better produced. It doesn't sound like it's based in the 80s. Now, if you're looking for the original version, this is not the original version of Boys Are Back in Town, nor is it the original version of New Shoes, the other song from 48 Hours, which was on American Worker. They re-recorded that as well, and that's still, heavier, but it sounds great. I mean, trust me, when I say these songs sound great, some people may not even know the difference. Me being a Busboys fan and owning all these records, I can tell the difference. But the album is filled with more great Brian O'Neill originals. This is actually a really fun album that you should check out if you are a fan of the Busboys. Very worth your time. But you know what? That's it. They have not released anything. This has been, 19 years or something like that since this came out? Has it really been that long? And yes, I just did a little bit more research, and this did come out 19 years ago. I've been waiting 19 years for more Busboys music. But anyway, that's it for this episode. I hope you take time to check out the Busboys, because there's a lot of great music to hear. Not sure if they're available to stream, but definitely give it a look. And if you like what you hear, please buy it. Whatever you do, do not just stream this music. Streaming is evil. The good Lord above created LPs and CDs and cassettes and 8-tracks, and the devil created streaming. Remember that. But until the next time we meet, my name is SPAZ, and I'm a CD junkie. Hey everybody, SPAZ again. I just wanted to mention, this is an addendum to the video. I did a little research after I filmed that bit, and I realized that the Entrada label did release a limited edition version of the 48 Hour soundtrack in 2011, featuring, of course, the Busboys tracks. In fact, I think there's 3 or 4, maybe 5 Busboys tracks on the album. And you know what that means, don't you? That means I have to save my dinero and track that down because it's out of print and it's selling for a few dollars. So, but that's it. My name is SPAZ, and I'm still a CD junkie.